Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Now, the Chris Evers, Philip Mantle, Inside Outer Limits radio show, Flying Disc Press, Outer Limits magazine endorse any of the products you may have heard advertised at the beginning or the end of this show or inserted into the middle of this show. The only products we do endorse are those that are strictly affiliated to Outer Limits magazine or to Flying Disc Press. We now hope you enjoy the show. Thank you.
Hello everybody once more, and welcome to another edition of the Inside Outer Limits radio show with myself, Chris Evers, the man from Outer Limits magazine, and of course my co-host, who you all know as UFO royalty. He's been on the telly, you know, and that's Mr. Philip Mantle. Hello, Phil.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chris.
How was the reception to the alien autopsy documentary then, Phil? How did that go?
Yeah. For those that are not aware, we made the series, 4-part series, Alien Autopsy: The Search for Answers. It's a retrospective title, loosely based on my book. We actually made it, last year, and it went out in time for the 25th anniversary, but that was only on download, Amazon and things like that. So it ended up on Blaze as part of their UFO week. And then, of course, because it's a 4-part, it's continued and it finished last Thursday. And I think there were only a couple of complaints. People said it went on a bit too long. I said, well, I've been researching it for 25 years. It's a bit difficult to compress it. But there were constructive criticism, and I don't mind it at all. But most people seem to like it and enjoy it, and find it of some interest. And got a number of people contact me afterwards with a few sightings. I was born and raised in a little village called East Ardsley, just outside of Wakefield, and there was a lady from there who contacted me, and I've not seen her, Chris, since I was about 8 years old. I used to know her 2 brothers. She was younger than us, so I didn't take much notice of her. She says, "Hello, Philip, do you remember me?" And as soon as she told me the name and her brother's names, it rung a bell. And her eldest brother, it's a long story, nothing to do with UFOs, but he was the first person to take us to the cinema. And that was in Morley. And we went to watch Mary Poppins. And because he was, a good few years older than us, he took a troop of us, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that was Jeffrey. So it's been nice, and of course we're on to making the next series now. That was half made last year. That's based on my new book that's coming up, UFO Landings in the UK. And the 4 witnesses that have been or will be interviewed for it, I don't think have ever been on television before. And so it's something completely different, to coin a phrase. And guess what? Nick Pope won't be on it either, which is amazing. So it's a Nick Pope free documentary. So,
do you know what, Phil? The thing there is, if these witnesses have not been on TV before, isn't it brilliant just to get some new information with new cases and new details, instead of going over the same old all the time?
Well, that's right, and this is a recording, but as tomorrow I'm doing an interview on Zoom for a documentary series that Sky are making. And it's, as far as I'm aware, it's the same cases that's been covered 1,000 times before. When speaking to one of their researchers, I tried to steer them in the direction of some, new material, shall we say, but they'd already got their mindset on what they wanted to do. So I said, okay, fair enough. I can't tell you what to do. But certainly when making the one based on my book, then I had the upper hand, because I could direct them to people in the book and say, this is an exclusive for you. And as soon as you say that, Oh, it's half made. It got stopped because of, so once the restrictions are relaxed, then we'll be up and running again.
Well, if all goes according to plan, especially in the UK, it's round about June the 21st when everything should be open again, or be back to, well, some kind of normal. I don't think it'll ever really go back to what we perceive to be normal, like every year, to be honest. You know, but from that day, everything should be back to normal.
Yeah, well, it's back to normal here. I had a haircut. So,
You mean you've got hair?
About it. Yeah, you think about it. You know, everything's closed, and you're here and thinking, what's the first thing I want when I'm out a haircut? I had to get it. It went out of that. I just bought a shaver online and shaved a lot off. it would get into that stage.
Well, I think you saw that photograph of me on Facebook the other day with my hair up. You know, the wife said I look like a cockerel. I'm about to crow in the morning. She said, but anyway,
you should have put a warning on that, Mr. Evers. Parental guidance.
Anyway, let's get on to why we're here today, then, Phil. Who have we got today?
I'm glad to say we've got an old friend of mine, and when I say old friend of mine, I don't mean he's old. I mean we've known each other several decades at the least. And it's Paul Ascough, and Paul, for those that are unaware, has been involved in the UFO research community for a long time. His name may not be the top of everyone's list because, like most UFO researchers, their work goes largely unrecognised. And Paul was part of Bufora for some time, but we were friends outside of that. And he lives not that far from us, and he's a nice guy as well. So we had the pleasure of publishing Paul's book on May the 1st of this year, UFOs The Real Story. And I shall say no more than that than to welcome Paul. Good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon, and thank you, and thanks for having me, both of you.
That's all right, Paul. Welcome to the show. How are you keeping?
Lovely. I'm excellent, thank you.
Good. Now,
just keep on being aware of these scary photographs people put on Facebook about haircuts and things. And then the next worst one would have been Philip with his head shaved. I think that would have been a bit too much.
I think we can organise that for a charity event for him.
it will get into that stage. I'm not kidding, because I did ask my wife Christine. I said, "Have you haven't got a shaver, have you?" She says, "No, I haven't." "Why? What are you asking for?" I said, "Because it's getting on my nerves. It's got to go sooner or later. It's just got to go." But anyway, I've got a haircut, so I'm happy.
Oh dear, I don't know. So, Paul, tell us about your book.
Right. It's what can I say? What I've tried to do is include a lot of things, because no decrying from what other researchers and people have done, and the likes of people that have written books, and Philip's published a lot of them as well, where they tend to do Rendlesham Forest, they tend to do the Belgian UFO wave, they tend to do Roswell, and I wanted to do something that encompassed the whole of ufology, as well as the paranormal as well, because they are linked in certain ways. And so for me, it was a way of my UFO contacts, my UFO experiences, and putting them all down and together in one book, and linking it with my thoughts. Now, I'm not scientific, I'm not a scientist, my brain's not that good really, I'm just a normal guy, but being a Yorkshireman, you always think you're right. And,
no, Paul, you don't think you're right. You know you're right.
Yeah, and until I'm proved otherwise, I'm still right at the minute.
I don't know. So your book then, it's really along the lines of what me and Phil have just discussed. It's something new that doesn't go over the same old cases that we seem to have thrown down our necks, time after time after time. What cases have you got in there?
Well, I've a lot of. Now, don't get me wrong. I do mention one or two cases to highlight something. Like, for example, I don't know if you're aware of it, you may not be off the top of your head, but the Gaffney Incident, which was in America, and it was a young couple driving, getting towards the evening, and they saw, a bit like Robert Taylor with the Beckmont Woods incident, where he initially saw the outline, like he could see through something. And they saw this craft approaching through the sky towards the treetops where they were. And as it came towards them, it became more solid, and the trees burst into flame as it got close to them. Now, without sort of cutting corners, what it is using the normal electromagnetic frequency, which we're only, what can I say, less aware of less than 1/10 of 1% from the visible spectrum and what you can hear as well. And so when something comes in like that comes into our field of vision, and it comes into our visible spectrum, the next piece of the spectrum to it on that side of things, if you're coming down the radio waves, is infrared. And so you get heat generated with it. So it would be quite logical that as they're tuning down through our visible spectrum, they would generate heat, and that's why the trees burst into flames on this occasion. Now, the young couple, they rang the authorities, they rang the police, the fire service, they duly turned up. By then, the UFO was long gone. The fire service put the fire out, and the police took a statement from them. But that was it. But for me, it's just one of those cases that highlights how this works, how it's the electromagnetic spectrum that, for the most part, we're totally unaware of.
So how does the book relate then to your own personal experiences? Because I do know you've got some of your personal cases, experiences in there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it started when I was 11 years old. And as a normal geeky child, not interested in anything that way particularly, although it was the Apollo missions were building up to going and landing on the moon at the time. They hadn't landed then yet. And it was 1968. And I was a young child with my brother, and we took our dog and our neighbour's dog for a walk, and as we came back home, my father was in the front garden, and we always had to say goodnight. We went into the garden to say goodnight, and as we did so, he's pointing out the stars, because there was no light pollution as there is round. I live just south of Leeds, which is quite a large city, so I get a lot of background pollution. Well, now I'm talking 1968, so there was no light pollution. We were on the edge of a very small village anyway, so you could see the stars really, really clearly. Now, it wasn't dark, and to one side of the sky was completely covered in cloud, a thick blanket of cloud, which stopped. It had this edge along it, and then from, like, looking due east, looking southwards, the sky was completely clear. So as the stars were coming out, my father, I mean, he wasn't an astronomer or anything, he had a telescope, we just had an interest, if you like. So he knew one or two of the major constellations, so he was pointing them out to us. So the three of us were sat looking up at the sky. And as we did so, two UFOs, one slightly to one side and slightly behind the other, came flying out of this bank of cloud and then just stopped dead. And they were just stayed stationary for a few seconds, and they were just perfectly circular, brilliant pearly white light given off from them. And then after a few seconds, they set off again at 90 degrees from when they came out, sort of going down the edge of the leading edge of the cloud. And you could actually see the light off them shining on the cloud. Now, there was no noise whatsoever, completely silent throughout. There was no apparent rotation or other lights, no strobes, anything like that. But the one thing that I did notice was, as they moved off, when they were actually moving, they had the very small little, like, teardrop shape behind them, as if they were giving off some sort of an envelope, if you like, surrounding them. And as they got close to the cloud and as they moved along it, when they got close to it, you could see the light shining from them on the cloud. You know, it was, and all three of us were sat there, just aghast, if you like, mouths open, gaping and looking, and it was silent for quite a while. And my father was the first to speak, and he said, "There's nothing that we've got that can do that." And he did his national service with the RAF, and it was like, for me, as a I don't know, impressionable young kid at the time, it was like, why don't I know about this? Why aren't I seeing it on the television? Why ain't it in the newspapers? Or why aren't people talking about it? You know, and that's what got me into it, because for me, it was, for want of a better term, it was unequivocal that it was alien. It was something different. It was something so bizarre, so odd, that it couldn't have been, you know, something from us.
Yeah, so your book then, I do know it covers a load of different subjects, really, you know, from paranormal to the UFO phenomena itself, and things. Does it cover, you know, like life and death and ley lines and all this kind of stuff?
Yep, all that.
Oh, that was a quick, short answer.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I know one thing, Paul. One of the sort of well-known names to most people in this subject, going back to perhaps the 60s, and maybe kicked over into the 70s, is Arthur Shuttlewood.
Yep.
And I believe you met old Arthur, did you not?
I did, bless him. I was, again, very fortunate. I had an uncle who was with a UFO group in the sort of Midlands, like Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, and further south, Leicestershire. And he had moved, not far from us anyway, on the South Yorkshire border. And as he came up, he called round one night and he said, "Paul, next weekend I'm going down to Warminster for the weekend. I'm on my own. I've got an empty car. You'd be welcome to come with me." So, of course, my parents said, you know, yeah, and I managed to persuade them, so that was it. Off we went, travelling through the night on Friday night to get down to Warminster. And it was this group, and they'd arranged to meet Arthur, and we did 2 nights, the Saturday night and the Sunday night, one night at Clay Hill and one night at Cradle Hill, which were the usual sky-watching little places where people used to go. I mean, for me, I might have been, I don't know, maybe 13 at the time, it was quite an eye-opener, because all these people had turned up and they'd get their little comfy chairs out on the flask and they'd just sit at the top of this lane, and I'm thinking, what is going on here, you know? And but it was nice because Arthur was lovely, really nice. He seemed a gentle old man to me at the time, and I had several conversations with him. I mean, one, we saw, what can I say, lights in the sky. We saw lights on both nights. And on one occasion, we were at the top of Cradle Hill, and I was just stood talking to him. And he used to like telling stories, did Arthur. And he said, during the day, my Uncle Ray and I had been down to Salisbury Plains and seen down to Avery and seen Stonehenge. So we'd been round Stonehenge. And I was just telling him, he says, last time I was there, he said, I'd walked down from the henge, because you could walk around Stonehenge then. And he said, I'd walked down from the henge, he says, and I walked down towards the road, to the Heelstone. And he says, I was looking at the sky, and he said, I rested with my back against the Heelstone. He says, and I put my head up as I was looking at the sky and resting. And he says, and as I did so, I got this beautiful musical note, seemed to go through the stone and through me, with like a light, like a beam of light that went up into the heavens from the Heelstone. I mean, as a young kid then, it was just a fascinating story, you know. Now, would it be good to sort of investigate? Now we've got some headway into the electromagnetic spectrum and see what can be seen.
I met Arthur on Cradle Hill. The first time I ever went to Cradle, me and a pal of mine, we'd no idea where we were going. We just got a train, and we went to Warminster, and we pulled in about 8 o'clock at night. And then, as you know, it's only a small town anyway.
It is, yeah.
We had nowhere to stay, just got a bag. So we went to one bed and breakfast who just looked at us and thought, look what the cat's dragged in. And we went to another one called the Stone Lee Guest House. I'll always remember it. Run by, I think she was a Hungarian lady and her husband. And they welcomed us in. And me and my pal Jim, we ended up walking up Cradle. We had no idea even where it was. We just somehow got there by chance.
Yeah. It was a fair walk.
It was. And lo and behold, this old boy come walking past. He just passed the time of day. No idea who he was, Paul, not a clue. And it wasn't until sometime later when I got one of his books that I said to my mate Jimmy, who was with us, that's that old boy we saw up there that night. And subsequently, I never met him again, but I did correspond with him on and off. And I went back to Warminster a few times. We always stayed at the Stone Lee Guest House because they'd made us welcome. I took friends there. Lovely place. If it's still going, I'd recommend it to anybody. But it's a nice part of the world, is it not?
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
But you and I, before we became friends, we also shared a sighting, did we not?
We did.
It was, you will get the date mixed up, but it was July the 23rd, 1984.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what you saw that night.
Right. I was married with my first wife then, living in Selby. And
I was just going to say, Paul, somebody had to.
Yeah. But we were in Selby anyway. It was a lovely evening, a bit like today, not much cloud about, and I can't remember what time it was, but it was quite late on, sort of after tea time. And I've been with we had a large dog at the time, and I was going to take him out, and as I'm in the back garden, because he used to have long haired, it was a Pyrenean, quite frequent brushing, and as I looked in, my wife shouted me. So what's the matter? I don't know. So I goes over, and she's pointing up in the sky, and there was for what in the world looked like, if you can imagine car headlights through fog, where you can just see the old circular headlights, and it was just like that, and I could see these headlights, and it was like, well, that's not an aeroplane. What's that doing there? And they were moving slowly towards us, quite high up. No sound, no rotation, no strobe lights, no anything, just two lights as moving parallel with each other. I mean, you could see nothing joining them. And they moved over, and as we're looking, we had two boys then, and the two boys came out, so there were the four of us watching it. And as it got almost directly overhead to us, they suddenly shot off, like warp factor 10, going in a westerly direction, a bit like the Star Trek when it goes to warp speed, and they were gone within seconds out of sight, and it was like, wow. So I took the dog for a walk then to see if I could still see anything with my eyes more on the sky than where I was going. 15-20 minutes later I came back, and I thought, well, I'll finish brushing the dog because I'd started it, and we were in the back, and then as I'm finishing brushing the dog, they came over the top of us again, and this time not moving quickly again as we first saw them, just moving slowly, and this time they were moving eastwards, and they moved over the top of us and just carried on in the same direction until they disappeared in the distance.
I mean, well, that particular night, I used to work in a factory just outside of Morley, which is South Leeds.
Yeah.
And I finished my shift at just before 10 o'clock at night. And I come out of the trading estate, and I turn right, and it's one long road, about 2 miles to where I lived. I wasn't married then, I was still living with my parents. And I used to have, that was my first car, I had a Volkswagen Beetle. And as soon as I got on the main road, I could see this light, and I thought, well, that shouldn't be there. I was familiar with the stars and planets and so on. So I went over the M62 motorway, and as you come down from that, over the flyover, there was a bus stop. So I pulled in there, and I could see this light. It's still there. So I took off again. And where I lived at Tinley, there was another bus lay-by. And where you stopped there, you could see the whole of Leeds in the valley below you. Right out almost to Leeds Bradford Airport on the hill opposite. And then just to the right of you was another hill, and that was the suburb of Middleton. and it was two lights, as Paul described it. Literally, you didn't have to crank your head up, you just look at them, just hanging above Middleton. One was slightly larger than the other, looked like a pearly white, and I'm stood there and there's traffic going by, and they just disappeared before my very eyes. I mean, gone. And bearing in mind, you know, with the lads I worked with in the factory, I'd heard every flying saucer joke you could think of. You know, I took some stick over it. But when I went back into work the following day to start my shift at 2:00, it was amazing how many of them said, Phil, did you see that thing last night? They'd been driving home either the same route or a similar route, because they all lived locally. And I was part of the Yorkshire UFO Society at that time. I phoned Mark Birdsall that night and told him what I'd seen. I went back out to the area for another hour, didn't see anything else. But the calls started coming in, and we got sightings, Paul, right out from where Chris is on the east coast near Humberside, right across past Leeds into North Yorkshire and back out, going back out, it seemed, towards the coast, over about a 2-hour period. Yeah. Lots and lots of people saw it, and we you know, I don't know if there's an explanation for it. I sometimes think there is, other times I'm not so sure. But we couldn't find one, because down in the dip, just outside of Leeds, there was a business there. The man that owned it, he got banned from driving, and so he bought a helicopter. He could fly a helicopter, so he couldn't drive the car, but he could fly the helicopter. Or whether he had a pilot, I don't know. So we regularly saw his helicopter come over that area, but a different route. Didn't look anything like this whatsoever. So it certainly wasn't him messing around. Well, I have no idea what it was, but I remember when you and I met, Paul, and we were chatting in general, and the question everybody always asks you, isn't it? Have you ever seen anything? And I remember you saying, July the 23rd, 1984. I knew what you were going to say, because I'd also seen it. And in fact, Graham Birdsall put a report together, which I have here somewhere. Don't ask me where to find it, but I know I've got it. It's in a box somewhere. And he thought it was helicopters, the police helicopter, spying on the miners, because 1984 was the miners' strike, of course. Yeah. And what Graham had done, he plotted the sightings on a map. And, of course, on the map there's a mine there, there's a mine there, there's a mine there. The only problem was that Graham had got an old map, and pretty much all the mines he was pointing to were no longer in existence. Yeah. Including Middleton and places like that. They'd long since gone. So, but it could have been. I mean, who knows? But it was puzzling, was it not?
It was, and it most certainly wasn't a helicopter.
No, because we found out after the miners didn't make any secrets of where they were going to be picketing and what they were going to be up to. They didn't, you know, and we know from subsequent information, if you like, that the miners had been infiltrated anyway, you know, and so the police knew of their every move. They didn't need a helicopter to spy on them. They knew what they were up to. But I know one of the subjects that tends to get people, shall we say, can get a bit heated at times, is the subject of abductions. You know, I remember one of my favourite UFO researchers of all time is the late Hilary Evans. I don't know if you ever met him, Paul. I don't know if you had the chance.
I didn't know.
But he was a mine of information, was Hilary. Others may know him from the Mary Evans Picture Library. He set that up with his wife. And Hilary was of the opinion that abductions had nothing to do with the UFO phenomena, that it was a total different type of experience that had somehow been stuck with the UFO subject. He regarded them as two entirely different subjects, because he wrote books on what I will call encounters with non-humans. down the centuries, we all know what they call them. But he was. So what you've got to take on here. I mean, in chapter 6, I do have your book in front of me. Abductees and explanations.
Yeah.
The field is yours.
Well, me again, going back to the electromagnetic spectrum. I quite agree. Jacques Vallée did it also with his Passport to Magonia, as well as Hilary Evans and some of his things. But to me, a lot of the, shall we say, cryptid reports, reports of fairies, leprechauns, a lot of other things, little devils, the things which Paul Sinclair and some of the others are coming across in these little hotspots and these little high strangeness areas, if you like, I think could all be connected. And one of the things which I have said is that if you look now where modern science, astrophysicists and that are all bandying figures about between, we'll say, 75 to 95% of the matter in the universe is dark energy and dark matter. We only make up a very small portion of it. So out of that small portion, we may only have 4 or 5%. Then the rest of it is this dark energy and dark matter that we're not aware of. And what I believe is that these are just going on from the electromagnetic spectrum. We are only just now pussyfooting around and learning that this is even there. Where, for want of a better term, I'll just use the phrase ET. ET's been using this electromagnetic spectrum to their benefit because they're complete masters at it. And that is why we get so many reports of like the UFOs appearing, but they're not on radar, or they're on radar, but they can't see anything. And it's the same with abductees, where everything, like where we're sat now, the chair we're sat on, the computer, your screen you're looking at, the very fabric of room and the building that we're in, for all of us, including ourselves, has a magnetic field. And that magnetic field is measurable. And every magnetic field reacts to every other one. Now, if you imagine at this moment in time, we have no way of controlling it, or we've only just learnt the very basics of measuring it. So for a race that could be theoretically thousands of years in front of us, they could be on a different magnetic, dimension, if you like, completely, and be around us all the time. And that is why I believe that you get people, individuals, on the spiritual side of things, the Malcolm Robinsons of this world, on the spiritualist side of things, where spiritual mediums are able to tune their frequency a little bit up or a little bit down, and to the same extent, or a much greater extent, that's what ET is able to do with the abductees, because they can recognize and control the electromagnetic spectrum. They can completely control what you remember, because it's a thought, it's an energy. So because they can control the energy, that's why you get so many instances of abductees that saying, well, there was a car or a vehicle at the side of the road, or there was an owl in a tree, is another common one. And this is something that Dolores Cannon, Bud Hopkins, Kath Marden, people that have made a living, I suppose, out of this. Bud Hopkins, who I was very fortunate to meet and have lunch with, he got into it quite by accident. And he said, Paul, I wasn't interested in UFOs at all. He says, I was literally just trying to help people. It was more of a, what do you call it, sort of helping people and trying to get them over it and sort of get them past it, if you like, so they could live some sort of normal life again. And he says, and the more I went into it and the more I did, it went from doing that to sort of investigating it, because he said, to my mind, there was obviously something to it. He says people from different walks of life and different parts of the world were coming up, unbeknownst to each other, with almost identical stories. He says, so logic would say there's got to be more to this. And so if you go back to the electromagnetic spectrum, where ET are complete masters at controlling it, they can, in my opinion, or they are able to read our thoughts, if you like, because every thought that we have is an electrical energy. So because they're so good at it, they know exactly where people are, they know exactly what to do, that they can appear at the side of somebody. It's the same with UFOs, how they can suddenly appear and disappear, because they're just tuning it, they're just moving it in and out of different frequencies. And that's why we also get the movement of abductees, if you like, that maybe people that say they floated out through the ceiling, or they floated out through a window, or even through a closed door. Because one of the things that happened is by moving that, being in control of that frequency, that person no longer inhabits their physical immediacy. They've tuned out of it. So it becomes easy for them to move people at will. Does that make sense?
It does actually, yeah. I know you're a little bit like me, Paul, really, in that I accept as well that ufology has changed over the years. And I know you do that as well. But along with that change, let's call them visitors, for want of a better word, our visitors and what they are trying to do, or appear to be trying to do, their modus operandi has changed as well, hasn't it, over the years? You know, back in the 50s, you know, it was George Adamski and the Space Brothers and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And
Elizabeth Clara.
Yeah. And you know, it's changed, and then we have in what is it, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill, and I think that was the first mention of the Greys and abductions, and you know, and then it went into cattle mutilations later on in the 60s with, I forgot the name of the horse now, but it was over in America.
Yeah, you're right.
You know,
yeah.
But why do you think that is? Why do you think that's changed?
I think part of it is our perception of it, and part of it is also because as a race, we've evolved fantastically from the 1960s, if you think what was available then to what is available now. So our understandings moved forward as well.
Do you mean technically with that, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do, yeah. And so part of it is the way that we've progressed, and I think they've had to change to make it acceptable to us. But we're still getting cattle mutilations and reports of it now. Yeah. The other thing on the abduction side of things is how much that, because they can control it, they control absolutely what you can remember. Philip will recall we did an abduction case from a West Yorkshire town near us where there were 4 adults, and the guy said, the atmosphere was very odd. And he said it was like, you know, things just weren't right. And again, retrospectively, he said that his memory of it was like somebody had, if you can imagine the memory as a videotape, he said he described it as people cutting his videotape up, and then putting bits back together. But some of them were in the wrong order, and some of them were missing entirely.
Well, if they can, sorry, Paul, to interrupt. If it is some kind of electrical transmission, our thoughts and memories must all be electrical. So if they can, do you know what I mean? Because they're actually up there in the brain. There's no solid thing in the brain that we contain our memories in. It's not like a VHS or a DVD where we slot something into the brain and it works. It's up there as electrical signals.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right. And I think that's how they're able to influence what we remember, and that is why also people remember more than they do. Or rather, sorry, I didn't phrase that very well. That's why they remember a little or not. I think they're completely in control of how much we're allowed to remember, shall I say.
That's interesting. Can you just remind us, Phil, please? Ray Calvin and And Charles Dixon, did they have full total recall of everything?
Yes and no. When it came, for those who are not aware, that Charlie and Calvin were involved in an encounter on October the 11th, 1973, whilst fishing on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. Calvin was 19 and Charlie was 42. They had pretty much full recollection. Calvin was so petrified on their way home, or that's where they thought they were going. They stopped and had a change of heart and phoned the authorities. They'd agreed to say that Calvin couldn't remember anything, that he'd saw the creatures come out of the craft and then he passed out and couldn't remember. That was just to protect Calvin.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I want of a better word, he'd lost it. And he'll admit that. But when it came to recollection, he could remember it all. However, for the others that are not aware, he had another encounter in 1993, the memories of which were vague. I think that's the best word to use. He knew something had happened and he got sort of little, you know, sometimes you can see things out your peripheral vision, but it's not quite clear. And it was a friend of his who was interested in the UFO subject who suggested you should go and speak to Bud Hopkins. And just by chance, Bud was at a conference in Florida. So they drove 13 hours unannounced to the conference. Calvin wouldn't go in case anyone recognized him. He sent his friend in who spoke to Bud, and Bud said, here's the key to my hotel room. I'll meet you there. And then, you know, after the chat, Calvin was still very suspicious of hypnosis. But you know, he was persuaded otherwise, and Bud hypnotized him there and then. And we found out through that Calvin had 2 encounters as a young man as well as a boy. Only short things, but then he relived the account in 73 and the one in 93. In 2019, we had the opportunity of Kathleen Marden to be in Pascagoula, and she regressed Calvin again. And extremely professional, for anybody who's any doubts, you know. And again, he went over all 4 encounters. So he remembered most of one and bits of another. Why that is, Paul might be right. I doubt it, but
fight.
Get in there. No. What I will say is, I think Paul and I are a good example of how ufology can work. There are a number of things we don't agree on, but we've never had a cross word about it.
No.
We discuss it like adults, and and also poke fun at each other. But I would never say Paul is wrong in that respect. I just say I'm not sure I agree with him. However, that's why it's important for books like Paul's to be published. I'm not saying that because I've published it and he's my friend. Is to listen to different opinions, and because none of us could be right, and it may be it could be the next gentleman who goes on the record who might be right. We could all be wrong, but it's interesting and I have read Paul's book. It doesn't mean I can remember all of it, but I have read it. But one thing that did struck home with me, Paul, is when you were a youngster.
Yeah.
A teenager, I would say. I think if I've got it right, you got interested in the Spiritualist Church, did you not?
Yep.
And you went to see a particular medium, and tell us a story about that.
Right. Well, there's several stories. So, what happened? I as like normal teenagers. When you were younger, you had to go to church. But as you get older, it was like, I can't be bothered with that. I'm more interested in going out with my mates and trying to get a drink and seeing young ladies and that sort of thing. And it's the same with everybody, you know. It's part of growing up. So the church really wasn't in my life. But the other thing also that my family weren't aware of is how much reading the other things I did with the UFO stuff, where I'd go out sky watching, but on my own, but I'd also catch, because I didn't have a car then, obviously being a young teenager, I'd go to my local, because as you were aware, when we were younger, there was no internet, there were no local library that was chock full of books on UFOs. You had to go to the bigger cities to get anything, to get a library that even had a book on UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you one example, Paul. When Whitley Strieber's book Communion came out, I think there was the main bookshop in Leeds was the only place I could get it, and so I caught the bus into Leeds. I think it might have been Waterstones at the time, and I went in and looked, and I found it in the religious section. Yeah. Sorry to interfere, mate.
No,
sorry.
It's fine, mate. You're dead right. But you see, what happened was I used to go out and this spiritual church was at the end of our road. So it was like 100 metres away from our house. So I had to walk past it if I was going anywhere. And I'm walking past it one day, and there'd obviously been some sort of service or something going on. And there's this old guy stood outside smoking a cigarette, like they did in those days. They went outside for a cigarette. And he was stood outside on his own. And as I'm walking past, he waved at me and he went, "Paul." Now, I didn't know this guy. Didn't know who he was. And I don't know how he knew me. He may have known me through my family because my mum and dad still went to the church. So I walked up to him because most kids did. You politely did as you're told, respected your elders. So I walked up to him. He says, "Just a minute." And he gets this little scrap of paper out of his pocket and a little pencil. He wrote something on it. And then he showed it me. And he'd just written the 3 letters, UFO. And he said, "Spirit have told me you're thinking on the right lines." Now, this guy, I didn't know him from Adam. He didn't know me, certainly. And he certainly didn't know that I was into UFOs as I was. So for me, that was like, I don't think I actually said a word. And it was like, really? How did he know that? But there's a few different instances that happened with church, the spiritualist church. One was a healing that I did with a lady.
That's the thing I was interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just weird. And there used to be a couple of old mediums that ran the church. As a kid, really, you were a bit wary of these people that did have conversations with other people that weren't there, and it was a bit, as a teenager, you were always a bit wary of them. But anyway, I was told to talk to Betty. So she comes up and she said, "I want you to go and see Pearl." Now, as it happened, Pearl had a daughter that was just a little bit younger than me, and she was stunning. She was gorgeous. So, of course, when this old medium saying, "I want you to go and see Pearl," I thought, that's a good excuse. So I want you to go and see Pearl. I want you to do some healing. Now, I had never, and I don't make any pretext on it whatsoever, I've never been to any, what they call the development circle or done anything like this. As far as I am aware, I have no spiritual abilities whatsoever. So she said, "I want you to go and see Pearl and do some healing." So I'm like, well, protesting as most kids do. Well, I don't really know Pearl, but it's a good excuse. I can go and see her daughter. But I don't do healing. And she said, "Just go and see her." So, what do you do? So, my father was the local bus driver at the time on the local routes. So, as that was the one perk we got as kids, because we didn't have our own transport, we could get on a bus and we didn't pay. It was wonderful. So we got all over West Yorkshire without paying. So we got on the bus, just a few villages away, went to see this Pearl, knocked on the door. She opens the door, lets me in, and the house is in total blackness. All the curtains are closed. Daughter wasn't there, so I was very disappointed. But anyway, I go in, and she's just got quite an open lounge, and in the middle was a high chair, like a dining chair. And she went down and sat on the dining chair. And then, I swear to God, it was like somebody else took over my body. And I walked up to the back of a chair where she was sat facing away from me, put my hands on her shoulders, and then it was like somebody took over my body. I put one hand, quite a bizarre position to be in, but one hand, it was my right hand I put up towards the ceiling, and my left hand just above her head. And then I'm sort of stood there. She'd said a prayer, I mean, I didn't know. I'd never said a prayer like this for, on the spiritual side of things anyway. So I'm stood there in this bizarre position at the back of her. And then all of a sudden, I felt an electrical current, like somebody had switched an electrical current on, coming down from wherever, through my arm, through my body, out through the top of my left hand, into the top of her head. And you could feel the vibration, you could feel the power light going through it. And it didn't last for more than a minute. And then it just stopped. And I physically felt it turn on and physically felt it switch off. And that was it. And I knew that was it. It was finished. And I just put my hands down, put my hands on her shoulders, and she stood up with this sort of a smile and a smirk on her face, and she just said, "My God, you hide your light under a bushel, don't you?" And I mean, I didn't even know what that meant. It was like, and it was like, so sort of 10 minutes later, she opened curtains, put kettle on, and then 10 minutes later, I'm walking out thinking, I still don't know what happened. You know, it was like, is that normal? Is that what was supposed to happen? So
what I'd like to ask is, why are spiritualist mediums in the spiritualist church featuring in a book about UFOs?
Because they use the electromagnetic spectrum exactly the same as UFO does.
Who is they?
A spiritualist medium.
Right.
Now they can only, if I just say for argument's sake, they're only able to control 1% of what ET, or as Chris would say, the visitors could control. They're completely able to control it. Where a spiritual medium is something, again, my father always said that we all have this innate ability. It's whether you want to develop it or have the opportunity to develop it or not. And it's something that for me, it almost felt like I was shown this is what you're capable of, or this is what everybody's capable of. And then that was it. Yeah, okay, that's another life experience. I know I can do that, or I know people can do that. I mean, don't ask me to, I have no idea. Don't ask me to do it now. I won't have the first idea what I was doing. But it was something that was very bizarre at the time, but it was, again, like we seen the first UFOs, it was something that was unequivocally happened. It was like there was no scientific reasoning behind it, or should I say normal scientific reasoning behind it, so it makes you think outside that box.
It reminded me again from when I was, 13, 14, the lady who used to live smack opposite, I mean literally other side of the road, was my best friend's grandma, Hilda. And she used to go to the spiritualist church in Morley. So I tagged along a few times with her. And I found it fascinating. Didn't agree with what they were not preaching, but with their statements. Yeah. And you, Paul, you know my ex-wife, Sue. She used to go to the spiritualist church on occasion in Batley. And I used to accompany her on occasions. And it was just to make me laugh, because by this time I was very sceptical, and she used to say, "Don't you say anything wrong before we go." And I said, "Well, surely they'll know. You know, they should know, shouldn't they?" And at no time did they ever pick me out for a message, ever. Yeah. And we went to some of these things at the town hall where they have pay a couple of quid and there's a medium for the evening, waving his hands in the air and saying, "I'm coming to you." He just points, you know, and there's 5 people put their arms up. So I still found it fascinating, but I just didn't agree with what their conclusions were. Yeah. But nonetheless, that's why I asked you, you know, why, because I remember reading it in your book, and there was this healing. I'm going to ask another thing about your book. I think this is something I'm going to have to insist upon in all future authors who write a book with us, is put a famous person in it, whether you've ever met them or they've got anything to do with it at all. Because as I'm reading through the book, who's staring at me but Olympic medalist Chris Akabusi? Yeah. How come he's in your book?
Well, I was fortunate, and I'm saying fortunate, when I was with the army, I went to, my battalion then was Prince of Wales Zone.
Hold on. Tell people about your involvement with the army. They won't know. Yeah.
I initially joined the Territorial Army, then I went in, not for long, because I transferred into the regular army. I was a Territorial Army soldier then when I was at the mine. I was working down the mine, and what happened was I could see where the miners' strike were going, and it was like, this ain't going to end well. So I asked to go into the regular army, and by hook or by crook they accepted me, and I went in, and I was attached to the medic for the Prince of Wales Zone, and I went from our depot with King's Division. I was helping out there. I then joined the battalion in Berlin. And when I was in Berlin, our PTI was Chris Akabusi.
Right.
And that's how I make, because I was friends with one of the other medics I was with, a really tall, big black guy called Sammy Azu. And I got really well with Sammy, lovely guy. But he was in the running team with Benson and a few others. And I was quite a good sprinter then, but I'm not, I wasn't 6'2" like Chris Akabusi or Sammy was, and they're all these tall black guys, so I were alright out of the blocks because I was only smaller than them, but then they'd just go, poof, and into the distance, and it was like, oh. So that's how I knew Chris Akabusi, because I used to mate about with the guys who were the sprinters, and he was our PTI when I was stationed in Berlin.
And for those who are not aware, you spent, was it 14 years in total in the military?
13, just over.
13.
Yeah.
And you were a medic?
Yep, from start to finish.
And you rose to what rank?
Staff Sergeant.
Staff Sergeant. So when you finished in the military, then what?
Well, then I came out, and then like everybody who's been in the military, you sort of, they retrain you to do jobs and back in Civistry. And one of the things that I'd done, I was a first aid instructor, St. John's first aid instructor, and I was going to do that freelance. And what happened, quite by chance, I met some guys who worked at Leeds Ambulance Station, and they said, oh, come on, Paul, join ambulance service, we need people like you. And that's what I did. So I stayed with the ambulance service, Yorkshire Ambulance Service, until I retired.
I've got.
You were a paramedic.
Yeah.
Sorry, Twin.
I want to tell you the story here, Chris. If you don't mind. But in 1999, in August 1999, Paul knows this. I had a serious and near fatal heart attack. I ended up in the coronary care unit of Dewsbury District Hospital. I've thanked them profusely a number of times because it was them that saved my bacon. So I think I'd been in hospital just a couple of days, and Paul came in to see me. So I think he was in uniform, you know, and he said, how are you doing, Philip? Look, you know, keep your chin up and all this lot. As he's about to walk away, I don't know if Paul remembers, the gentleman in the next bed said, excuse me, young man, you got a minute? And he called Paul over and he shook his hand and he says, thank you, you saved my life yesterday. And Paul had attended this fella and done whatever they do. And I've not said it because he's a mate, but we thank all of them for what they've done. I'll never forget that moment. And not only that, Paul, within 7 to 10 days after I got out of hospital, you went through rehab.
Yeah.
And I'm in rehab struggling, and this fella is sprinting up and down the corridor. And I think when by the time you and your colleague got to him, he was dead. But you revived him. Yeah. And Paul, he looked like he'd not had a cold, let alone a heart attack. He was literally Lazarus risen from the grave, you know. And I'm stood there, and I remember him being in the next bed, and he's running up and down the corridor. And I'm thinking, I wish the hell I could do that. But so I remember him thanking. I bet you don't remember him thanking you, do you?
Very vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. But, so that's why we've got Chris Akabusi. But that's what I'm going to go back now and revise my new book, and I'm going to somehow get Linford Christie into it. Because when I worked for the Halifax as a customer service agent answering the telephone in their credit card inquiries, I actually spoke to Linford Christie one night, and it'll make you laugh. My pal next to me was working next to me. I told him, he says, I bet that's the quickest phone call you've ever done in it, 9.8 seconds. So
very good.
I'm going to say I know somebody famous. I spoke to him for about a minute. That's Linford Christie. So that's going to be in all the contracts of all the future authors at Flying Disc Press.
Well, I'll make Gordon Banks, mate, so there
famous.
You go.
Well, there you go. Sticking up. I mean, what else? So I know Paul, you've had a number of other sightings down the years, because you keep telling me.
Yep.
Is there anything that of particular stands out? You think, yeah, I've seen a few things, but this really puzzled me, or have we already covered it?
Well, there's a few. One was, we used to do part of the NHS now with paramedics, especially more recently. Everybody's moved on to 12-hour shifts, so you do 12-hour days or 12-hour nights. And towards the end, I worked in our sort of emergency operations centre. So because you sat down at a computer, I used to make a point of going out for a walk every night.
Explain what you were doing there, Paul.
Right. We used to, part of a sort of I was a trauma coordinator, which is like a clinical advisor role, where you ring the hospitals all the time, and we would be in constant contact with the different hospitals. So anybody of the more serious incidents, we would get maybe the heart team or the helicopter or the doctors that are out, and we would get them then tell the hospitals what patient they were getting and why they were getting it and what had been done so far, that sort of thing. So it was just like a liaison job. But because you were on computers all the time, you were sat on your bum, and I thought, I've got to have a walk. When I have my break, I'm going for a walk. And that's what I used to do. And even at night, sometimes it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd go out for half an hour and walk around the industrial estate just to get a breath of fresh air, stretch my legs and get a bit of exercise. So one night I'm out. There's no part of my job was we knew where the helicopters were. So the ambulance helicopter had gone to bed and they'd all gone home for the night. The police helicopter was sat on its pad. That wasn't being used. There was no aircraft in and out of Leeds Bradford Airport. This was, I believe it was October 2018. So not that long ago. And as I'm walking back towards headquarters and walking back to go to work again, there's one cloud, literally one cloud in the sky, quite low down, due east from my position, which was like the M1, M62 junction. And as I'm looking due east, towards Pontefract as it happens, Philip, there's this one cloud, and out of the cloud came what I thought was an aircraft, very bright landing lights coming towards me. Now, because I thought landing lights coming towards me, it was easily the brightest thing in the sky at the time. The thing was, it didn't move. It came out, and I thought, well, is it going into a headwind? You know, everybody tries to rationalise what they're seeing. So I'm seeing this coming towards me, or what I thought coming towards me, and it wasn't moving. So I got my phone out, and I recorded it. And I recorded it for about, I think it was 17 or 18 seconds. And it remained stationary. And it's just like an all-void, blurry white light with the odd red and green light in it. And then it went, as I turned the phone off to look at it some more, and it just went sideways back into the cloud again. Now, throughout, as you would know on the normal aircraft, you can see when they come over towards you, you can see when they move away from you. And there was nothing. It had just disappeared. And I think I was just very fortunate that I managed to record it at the right time. So whether they abducted you or not on that night, Philip, I'm not sure, but it was over your neck of the woods.
More than likely.
Yeah. So I've got an 18-second video of something quite unexplained. I mean, there's been a few. There were one that I managed to slot in at the end of my book, where I often, I won't say always, but often, if it's quiet and there's nothing much on television and it's not cold and raining, if you've reasonable skies, I'll just go out and get the sunbed out, lay on my back with a pair of binoculars and watch the sky. And on one occasion, I'm watching some bright, sort of creamy coloured light. And that's all it was just a light, but it was going almost due north. And it wasn't sort of on the normal satellite paths. It wasn't on my app for aircraft or anything else. There were nothing on it. And I'm watching this light through the binoculars. And as I'm watching it, at the same time, another light suddenly appeared behind it, went flying past it. Well, flying's the wrong word, but anyway, went zooming past it in exactly the same direction, but twice the speed. And it was so, but again, that was something that was so bizarre, it made my hair stand on end. And I went, wow, I sort of said it out loud, and it was like, whoa, look at that, you know, why didn't I manage to get that on video? But as we're all aware, and Philip's done many of them, sky watchers, trying to record lights in the sky. By the time you see them and get a camera up to you to record it, you can't see anything anyway.
Yeah. I just wanted to just go back a little bit, if you don't mind, Paul.
No,
Spiritualism. Working as a paramedic with the NHS and, you know, and in the army and so on. And as you just explained, you've brought many people back after they've collapsed, etc. Did any of them ever say to you, why have you brought me back? You know, I was in a paradise, or I was in heaven, or something like that. Has anybody ever said anything like that to you?
No, is my short answer.
I'm not trying to be... Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, you're right. Yeah, because, I mean, I'm aware of people like Dr. Eben, who did the near-death experiences and how it changed his life. So I am aware of near-death experiences, although I've never spoken physically to some... Well, I have, actually. But that's a different story. That was somebody, a diabetic.
Yeah,
Chris.
yeah. Not me. It wasn't me.
No, not you. A lady that we knew for many years, sadly no longer with us, but she was the same. And she said it was different. And she says, and they told me it just wasn't my time and I had to go back.
Because, I see, I found that quite interesting because I know, I think you wrote something down along the lines of, you know, that religions are not are man-made and God didn't write anything down. And
yeah, correct.
You know, you see, what I find interesting is if we die and we our soul, and I won't go into all that. I've had an article in Outer Limits magazine that I wrote myself of what I think the soul is. You know, if the soul lives on after death, why, when these people, for want of a better word, are resurrected from that dead state, you know, when you get to them, you know, and you bring them back by either putting oxygen into them or, you know, I can't remember what you call it now, you know, when you're pushing on the
defibrillator.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Why don't they ever come and say, you know, you brought me back, I was in heaven, I was with God, or I was with Jesus, or something like that? You see, I found that quite interesting. But what I also find interesting is that a lot of spiritualists, you know, and I'm not trying to cause an argument or anything like that, claim it's a God-given power. A lot of them do that. Some don't, but a lot do. But you see, I find it quite interesting in that the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18 and verses 10 to 13, basically says, there shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto our Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. And that's a quote from the King James Version there. So, you know, so why do a lot of them claim that it is a God-given power? And I noticed that, you know, in your book as well, you bring the Bible into it, and is it the Mahabharata? I can't pronounce it properly, but you know, how does it all link together?
It's, well, to me, all I'm pointing out with things like that is all religions, whatever they are, and I don't care who you are, whether it's Christian, whether it's Jewish, whether it's Hindu, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Muslim, it don't make any difference. They're all man-made. It's always man that wrote something down. God didn't write anything down. Therefore, as in the King James Version of the Bible, there are, as you are aware, there are many versions of the Bible, and there are many, many ways that it's been interpreted or misinterpreted. It's like if you look at going back to, dare I say, Catholicism, where they're very strict medieval way of looking at things, and how they've cut so many well, I'll just say Gospels from the Bible. They haven't included them. It's like they're on about 10 commandments. If you look at it and do research on it, there's more than 100 commandments. But they've just cherry-picked those 10 out. It's like the modern Roman Catholic Church cherry-picked the Gospels and the chapters that they wanted in the Bible, and what didn't suit their, shall I say, dare I say, business at the time, just wasn't included.
I do actually agree with you, Paul. I think me and Phil have discussed this privately before. I'm not a great believer in God, but I do know what the Bible says, and i.e. with Jesus as well. I'm not saying there wasn't anybody called Jesus, but that's actually a Greek name. His Hebrew name was Yeshua, or Joshua, as we pronounce it today, I think, which I think means something like God saves or something like that, But I'm not a great believer in the Bible. I think it's caused too many divisions, and as you've just mentioned.
I'll tell you a story there, Chris, and I think Paul knows him. One of my best friends is a Norwegian gentleman. He's called Odd Gunner Road. Lives, about an hour from south of Oslo in a lovely place near the town of Tonsberg. I've been there many times. I was over there once on one trip on my own, and he'd arranged for me and him to do a presentation one evening. Mine, I think, was about the alien autopsy film. So, the usual. In those days, it was slides. So he lives on an island. We drove right round to the other side of the island and to a very big house. And he explained to me these were the organisation we were speaking for were a bit like what do you call them? Not the Quakers. The
Wesleyans.
No.
Mormons.
No, not a religious order, but
all right.
Anyway, so in we goes. Obviously, this gentleman was a man of means. There's about 30 people there, and there were politicians. The chap I was speaking to was a fighter pilot. There were all of that ilk. So I did my presentation on alien autopsy. I asked them first if they all spoke English, and I said, well, that's no good because I'm from Yorkshire. That got a laugh, And so it come to Odd Gunner's presentation, and he said, I'll start the presentation off in English for Philip's benefit, but then I'll change to Norwegian. So his first question to this assembled order is, who's the biggest mass murderer on Earth? So they're going Hitler, Genghis Khan, whatever. And he said, no. He says it's God. And then thankfully he changed to Norwegian. And I thought, we're never going to get out of this place alive, Never going to get out of this place alive. But I don't know what else he went on. Anyway, after it was finished, we had some dinner with them. And on the way out, they gave us a bottle of wine each as a thank you. And when I got back to my pal's house, he said, we must have done something right. I said, why? He said, look at this wine. I said, well, so it's a bottle of wine, so what? He said, it's a special vintage. It costs an arm and a leg. I said, yeah, you can have it. I don't like the stuff anyway. So, but he said the biggest mass murderer was God. And there you go.
Well, it doesn't matter which God, whether it's the Christian God, the Jewish God, the Muslim God. We're all supposed to be the same God anyway, or it's Hindu, or it's Buddhism. Religion has caused
single out any religion. No, he just said God, and that was it. Yeah. So I think we'll move on anyway. I know it's one thing that again causes discussion and debate, shall we say, Paul, in your book, and you've got pictures of them. Orbs,
yeah.
I mean, come on. Yeah. Orbs is just dust.
Right, well, no.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well,
I can guarantee you, Chris, if I'd have agreed with him, he would have disagreed with me.
No,
come on.
You're right sometimes, Philip, but not on this occasion, because we went to the place, Casadega it's called, in Florida, and it's a spiritual retreat where mediums go to develop and do whatever. But members of the public can go and they do readings and that sort of thing. And there's this spooky little hotel that people can go and stay in. But the one thing that they do is they have something called the orb walk. Now, normally you can't see orbs, but I've said that. But on this occasion, well, I've been 3 times, but on the second occasion were 2 girls that were sisters, that were both spiritualist mediums that could see orbs, and it were like, how can you see orbs? But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, I'm going into this. Their church was being repaired, and I was in the what can I say, the village hall that they were using temporarily as a place of worship. So it was all laid out, and they said, yeah, you can have a walk round and do whatever. So I'm walking down one side of the building. Like, if you can imagine, there's a centre aisle at a church, and then there's room to walk down either side, where all the chairs were out in pews, in rows. So I'm walking down one edge, and as I got to this picture, my hair stood on end, and I felt there was somebody stood at the side of me. It was just like there was a presence there. Couldn't see anything, and I wasn't afraid or anything. I wasn't scared. I could just feel there was something there. And all my hair on my arms, my hair on my neck was stood up. And Eve was stood at the end, my wife, with the camera. And I said, Eve, take me picture. And she just put the camera up and took me picture, and that was it. So she said, why? And I was with 2 other friends. So we looked at the picture, and I was surrounded. There were about 7 or 8 different orbs on this picture. So I said, right, Eve, go back down there where I was stood. So I directed her to where I was stood, and we swapped places. And I said, can you feel anything? And she went, no. So we were stood in exactly the same positions, but opposite way round. I took her picture, and there was just her on it. There was no orbs on it. And it was just, for me, you could go round this, we did the orb walk on several occasions, and you could take pictures, and there were some orbs on it. Sometimes many more than others. But, as we're all aware, especially you, Chris, being a photographer, you can take thousands of photographs. And I've got, even on my iPad, I can tell you now, I've got 1,000 photographs. But I only have ones with orbs on at this place in Cassadagan. And it was bizarre that I felt something, and then orbs were there. So I don't know, and I can't say that I know for definite, but that was just my experience. So whether orbs are some representation of a spirit, that's not for me to say, but that's what I experienced.
Come on, Chris, you're the photographer.
Well, I can give you a personal experience. I mean, obviously, I've covered many, many weddings over the years. I've been doing it nearly 10 years now as a wedding photographer. That's my advertisement place there, folks. I've looked at many, many, many images, and I've never, ever, ever caught an orb on one of these photographs. But yes, they can be made by dust particles floating in the air close to the camera lens, and the flashlight going off. Something like that. That can bring them out. But a number of years ago, myself and my wife were in Hull Museum's Transport Museum, and it had just moved premises about 2 or 3 years earlier. And we're walking round, and I'm there with my iPhone camera, using the camera on my iPhone. And I happened to look into this area, which was actually locked off from the public, I was looking through a window, basically, into this area where they had some old horse-drawn carriages that were in there, and coaches and so on. And I'm looking through the lens. I'm looking through my camera on the telephone that I was using. It was an iPhone 6S which I was using, and looking through it, and I could see orbs moving around on this camera. But obviously I had the camera in front of me, so I just looked over the top, and there was absolutely nothing there. But my camera on my iPhone was picking them up. So whether or not they are a spirit which lives on after a person has died, I don't believe that, to be quite honest. I think they are dust particles myself. But it's quite strange how the camera picked it up and my eyesight could not pick it up.
Yeah.
So, right, we're at that point, Paul. Where do we get the book, and when does it come out?
Well, as Philip's quite rightly said, it's out on May the 1st on Amazon, available as a paperback, as an ebook, or I believe it will be available as an audiobook too.
Yeah, as we speak, it is being narrated and turned into an audiobook, and so that's on the way. But as of May the 1st, paperback and ebook will definitely be there, and if the ebook's not there at that time, it will join it shortly thereafter.
That's excellent. Now, I do know that you do mention quite a lot in the book, Paul. You know, I mean, you've even got the Philadelphia experiment in there as well. So, you know, tell us what else you've got in there, because we are beginning to close the show down now.
Yeah. Well, very briefly, they're all sort of different aspects, I believe, of the electromagnetic spectrum, and that I put a lot of different things in to get people to think along those lines, because I believe that I'm right. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I'm thinking that I'm definitely, as the old guy said to me, thinking on the right lines. Now, obviously, if I see or get proof from a different thing, then so be it. One of the other things that I point out is that a lot of abductees and people that see things, and it's true of spirit too, get this absolute silence when they see UFOs. And I know for a fact that several of the people you have on the agenda to speak at the Outer Limits conference in August, they have personally experienced it, where if they have a sighting or an abductee, they get this complete silence. And it's not like you can still hear the wind or the traffic in the distance or anything else, or birds in the trees. You can hear nothing. It is complete silence. And that, I believe, is because, again, we are being tuned out of what we would normally, the normal acoustic spectrum that we would hear.
Yeah, this reality.
And because they're moving you into a different reality to experience them, that's why you get this absolute silence, because it's a different place. I could go on, there's more to it than that, but...
Well, what I would say, if there's more to it, there's two ways to find out more.
Yeah.
One is buy your book, UFOs The Real Story, by Paul Ascough, and you'll be making a presentation at Chris's conference in Hull in August.
Yep.
What's the date, Chris?
21st and 22nd of August, 97, Preston Road, Hull, at the Freedom Centre.
And by that time, we should have found a few more famous athletes whose name we can drop within the presentation, and come along and listen, or buy a book and have a read.
All I'm going to say is somebody else has wrote this, Paul, about your book, and please forgive me, but I'm going to pinch it off them. All in all, this book is jam-packed with the views and thoughts of the author towards many paranormal and UFO events. It's refreshing to read Paul's thoughts, which in the main I concur with, whilst others have opened up my eyes to thinking even further outside the box.
Yeah.
So, Paul Ascough, thank you very much for joining us today on the Inside Outer Limits radio show with myself, Chris Evers, and from Phil.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for your time, mate. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Much appreciated to both of you too.